to find out how many points you have. And if you have an active membership, then you have perks like merch and the end of semester trip at the end of spring. So yeah. And then just a quick reminder of our international SCB memberships. We have funding from SG if you want to just become a member and just have perks like having access to their newsletter and other scholarships. And there's more information on that on the form, which is on the link. And yeah, we're closing it in 2 weeks on November 2nd. And then the Green Building Club reached out to us. They're doing a 5K this upcoming Sunday. And yeah, we just wanted to advertise it as an opportunity for you to participate in something sustainability related on campus. Registration is free and you can get a free t-shirt if you're one of the first 70 people. And that link is also on that tiny URL. And then our upcoming events include Louis Bat Fest volunteering, which is on October 23rd. Our event coordinator, Kaylee, has put that information on the GroupMe a few times. So be sure you're on there if you're interested. And then we're also doing a Halloween craft night on October 30th. And more information on that will be coming as well. And then a reminder that our next GBM is 2 weeks from today in the same room at the same time. Awesome. And now let's give a warm welcome to tonight's speaker, Tyler Bowling. He's a PhD student at the Florida Program for Shark Research at UF.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. So we'll talk a little bit about sharks. You all see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So Florida Program for Shark Research is at the Florida Museum at UF, and I am the program manager. And so a little bit start about why we kind of as a culture fear sharks so much. So think about it like when you walk through the woods at night and you hear a noise, your imagination runs wild because you don't know what made that noise. It's spooky. And so you create monsters where there are none. Well, the way I describe it to people is the ocean is kind of like the forest at night. We're not really supposed to be there even. We have to have special equipment just to go down in the water. So we tend to make monsters where there are none. So hopefully tonight I can make sharks a little less scary and you guys can learn a little bit and be inspired to learn more. So a bit about sharks in general. They're an extremely diverse group. We have sharks that are warm-blooded, like this salmon shark. They're found up in Alaska and their blood can be 70 degrees warmer than the ambient water temperature. We have sharks that are world travelers. They're moving between continents. For example, white sharks or even tiger sharks. We have sharks that lay eggs and sharks that give live birth, like this lemon shark. We even have sharks that clone themselves through a process called parthenogenesis. Just like Jurassic Park, when there's only females, some species can actually create a copy. And so I really want to bring home the fact that sharks are incredibly diverse, and so we can't really make generalizations. And so what this graphic is showing is the genetic relatedness of certain species. So on the far left is a white shark, and then it is about as genetically related to a bull shark as a kangaroo is to a dog. So generalizations really aren't possible. It's apples and oranges. So a shark is a shark, right? Maybe not. And as for skates and rays, they're just flat sharks. So a bit about the sharks that we have right here in Florida. So we've got black tips and spinners and sandbars, which are our small coastal sharks. We get these relatively closer to shore. Spinners are a bit farther off. We've got our bull sharks, which are a bit more dangerous, our bonnet heads and our great hammerheads. We've got lemon sharks and nurse sharks and tigers. So our medium danger level is black tips and spinners. These are normally incidental bites. They aren't looking for any trouble. They get into murky surf and they accidentally bite folks. Your kind of medium danger level would be the great hammerheads and the lemons. People often like to dive with these animals. They're generally pretty harmless, but if you get in their space or harass, they'll definitely bite. Tiger sharks and bull sharks are the most dangerous. They're highly aggressive and inquisitive. Well, we see a lot of bites from them. And then lastly is our nurse sharks. Nurse sharks are very docile. And because of that, people get kind of cocky. And so they do things that they shouldn't. And so we see a lot of provoked incidents from nurse sharks. So a bit about the International Shark Attack File, which our program manages. So it was founded in 1958 by the Navy. So back when we had a lot more naval warfare and actually ships going down in the ocean, people were being eaten by sharks. And so the Navy wanted to look in to deterrence and figuring out, what patterns can we see in shark bites? And so they started the file. And as naval warfare shifted away and just became sort of military transports and less battles at sea, people weren't drowning, ships weren't going down. So the file lost interest in the military, and it changed hands a couple of times until in 1988, it came to the Florida Museum in UF, where it has stayed. We've now documented, as of this morning, 6,718 cases, and that's retroactive. So we have cases from the 1800s and even older. So a bit about our process. So whenever there's a bite anywhere in the world, we first have to figure out that it happened, and we work with local authorities, local researchers. Some of them contact us, or we can reach out to folks once there's been an established bite. We figure out what circumstances were involved. We interview witnesses, we interview the victim if at all possible. We try to figure out the exact circumstances that happened. And if possible, we can get images of the actual bites, whether it be on a surfboard or the person. And we can do an analysis, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So after we gather all this information, we can make a determination about who was at fault. Did the shark initiate this contact? If so, we would call that an unprovoked bite. Or did the person do something that they shouldn't have and provoke the shark? And based on this information, we can create safety protocols for beaches. And remember how I was talking how sharks are always a little different? We can't lump these species together. We can actually create informed safety procedures based on different geographic locations and the species that are found there. So a bit more about the forensic bite analysis, which is a big part of what we do. So we can actually look at the jaw structure and the teeth and compare it to the wounds. So for example, if we had just kind of a basic bite structure, we can look at the size or the shape of the tooth marks. We can look at the distance between marks. We can see if there's any dragging, or if the skin was tearing. Sometimes if there's enough force, it'll tear. How the depth of these marks and the overall width of the jaw. And we can kind of get an idea, hopefully, but not always, about the species involved. But we don't always get these perfect, bites with all of this detailed information. Sometimes they're pretty minor. And so that might not be enough to even confirm it was a shark. And so we never ever assign a species if we don't have enough evidence. That being said, we're now going through programs where we're actually getting DNA swabs. We're able to already do this with teeth fragments recovered from bites, where we can extract DNA and figure out, what species it is. And now we have programs in Florida where people are bitten, and the lifeguards already have these swab kits where they can, collect mucus from the actual wound. And so what we're doing right now is we kind of have a hit and miss. Some of them are coming back with a hit, and some of them are just contaminated because there's so much background DNA from the person or the water, et cetera. So we're still working on it. Now, I already mentioned that sometimes a bite is not necessarily from a shark. We get a lot of other species that are responsible, but people feel pain in the ocean and they just assume it was a shark. Common perpetrators involve barracuda, bluefish, even stingrays or eels. The most innocent thing I've seen is somebody stepped on an oyster and claimed it was a shark. So what are the overall trends in shark bites over the past several decades? So the majority of these bites are test bites or investigatory events. So the shark's not sure what that is, doesn't have hands, so it's going to go take a little bite out of it. It moved too much, it was very bony, we're going to let it go and go our separate ways. The fatalities that we see is mainly due to the placement of the bites. These can be large animals that take large bites. And if that happens to be on a thigh and hits an artery, that's where we see these fatalities occurring. Now, the long-term trends, we're seeing a gradual increase. Now, we attribute this to two things. A, the overall population of humans is increasing. More people in the water is more chance of being bit, as well as better reporting. We've got the internet now. People put on social media that they got bit by a shark, or it's a lot easier for people to become aware of these things. But in the short term, last decade or two, we're actually seeing a decrease in bites. And that's, we'd like to think, due to safety protocols. So we've got folks who are more aware that when there's sharks in the area and how to respond. And here's just a graphic about population growth. And we're seeing a steady decline. We actually saw a significant drop in 2020, partially due to COVID, because twofold, there were a lot more people in lockdown not going to the beach, but also there was a reporting issue because the normal first responders that we would work with were not responding to shark bites because they were overwhelmed with cases. So what are the actual odds of being bitten by a shark? We've talked about, we spend all this time investigating, but how likely is it? So the odds of being bitten by a shark are 1 in about 11.5 million. It's not really worth worrying about. And the odds of dying are even smaller, less than 1 in 264 million. So again, this is kind of an invented fear. But how do you reduce this already astronomically small event? So always swim with a buddy. Avoid swimming at dawn or dusk. These are prime feeding times for many species. Avoid swimming where you see bait fish, so small silvery fish swimming around. That's what the sharks are eating. You don't want to be swimming there. If you see people fishing, avoid that as well. Don't wear jewelry. The shimmering of a necklace or whatnot can mimic a fish scale and cause a shark to investigate. And avoid prolonged splashing. The sound of splashing underwater is a low frequency sound. And that's the sound that a struggling fish makes. So if you splash for an extremely long time, it might cause a shark to investigate to see if there's an animal in distress. So a little bit about Florida's fishing laws that have just changed for sharks, very relevant. So now they actually require a permit for shore-based shark fishing, whereas before it was just kind of a free-for-all. So now there's a lot more education involved because there's so many protected species. Chumming is prohibited because we don't want to lure but so many sharks in close to shore where people are swimming. Prohibited species have to be released immediately. We actually prefer that anglers cut the line rather than get the shark all the way in to remove the hook. And any prohibited species cannot exit the water. So why do we want people to cut the line and leave that hook in? We see all these videos online of these divers taking hooks out because of lactic acid. So when you go to the gym or go for a run and your muscles get sore, that's lactic acid buildup. Well, your body has kind of a shutoff where it can say, okay, I've had enough. My muscles are sore. I'm going to stop. Sharks don't actually have that. And the lactic acid and the stress hormones can build up from these long fights with anglers to the point where they can actually die. So even if the shark, swam off after a long fight, it's probably going to wash up on the beach dead within a couple of hours. So we really encourage folks to just cut the line. So should we be catching sharks at all? As a conservation group, you already know that sharks are globally in peril as a group. Many species are doing fine, but majority of large pelagic or open ocean species are actually being overfished for their fins, for the shark fin soup market. And many of these species are very slow to reproduce. Some of them don't even reach sexual maturity until they're 20 some years old. And so that doesn't leave enough time for them to replace individuals in the population if they're taken out. They're also very high in mercury. So you can hear warnings about tuna or swordfish. The same is true of sharks. So these apex predators have this accumulation of toxins in the environment, which actually make it very unsafe to eat in the first place. And then finning is running rampant. We've passed legislation in the US so that fins can't be transported through here. It really wasn't an issue in the US anyway. It was kind of a feel-good law. We weren't a major hub to begin with, but it's good that people are aware of that. So should we be killing any sharks? Actually, yes. So these small coastal sharks, for example, black tips like this one shown here, can actually really help their species if people go out and recreationally fish for them. So they don't have that mercury buildup because they're not the biggest sharks. They're not these top predators. And the money that goes into these fishing licenses and these permits is actually used for conservation across systems, including sharks. And so the program that this is through in state and national levels called the Dingell-Johnson Act. And there's an equivalent for game species with hunting as well. And so what this does, it not only funnels money into conservation, but it also creates this investment in the resource. So rather than people, not knowing anything about it, they're interested, they're involved, they're seeing these species up close, and so they want to do something about it. So yeah, we want folks to go out and fish for sharks, but only the populations that are safe and have enough individuals that they can handle a harvest. So if you guys want to learn more about sharks, you can visit our website, or you can visit local aquariums or Smithsonian or whatever. And I'm free for half hour or so if you guys want to ask me any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. Yeah, let me, if you want to turn on the light. Yeah, if anyone has any questions online, feel free to send them in the chat. And does anyone in person have any questions?
Have you found the shore-based shark fishing permit to be effective? I actually got one, I think the first year it came out, because I worked with FWC, and I know that they were really trying to push it to some fishermen, but there seemed to be a little bit of not pushback, but hesitancy towards the program. So I'm wondering if you guys have any data on that yet.
We're still collecting that kind of data, and there's more folks who are more invested in it than our particular group. But I can say that there's always usually a little pushback, and that's one side of a coin. The same amount of people who are fighting it in that angling community, there's also an equal sized group who helped advise that legislation in the first place. So there's a lot of people that wanted that who are anglers. So will the other folks come around? Yes, they usually do. This is not a new concept. We're seeing this repeat itself with Goliath groupers right now. Folks, they've just, FWC has just released a plan that a limited harvest for Goliath groupers of a certain size limit in 2023. There's room for revisions. Same type of thing. We've got people who want nothing to do with it, terrible idea, yada, yada, yada. People who know that this is going to bring money and into the system, because this is part of a lottery draw. So you actually have a buy-in. So you have a chance, because we're only going to give out a certain number of tags to take, I think, 200 individuals, but don't quote me on that. And so we're going to gain a lot of money from this. And that all that money's getting put into conservation. And so, same type of deal. This could still change. FWC has said that there's going to be a year probation while they reevaluate and think about things. But yeah, any new rule, you're going to have pushback, and people normally get on board.
Okay, a follow-up question to that. For shark-based fishing from boats, are there regulations on that? Because I saw a shark that had been filleted and the parts were left behind at Cedar Key a couple weeks ago. And I get the feeling that's not supposed to happen, because I know they require you to bring the shark in whole.
They do. So yeah, it does not require the same training or the permit. But yeah, a game warden can certainly roll up on anybody who did that and give them a significant fine.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I know media has played a large role in instilling a fear with sharks. Has that transcended like internationally? Like, do other countries also have that fear of sharks that I feel like America has? I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Oh yeah, because we work internationally. So it's that fear of sharks is kind of a first world country type of thing, wherever jaws seem to touch. So fear of sharks is big in Australia. It's big in parts of Asia. Other places, they're just accepted as a, piece of the environment. And honestly, the places where they're more accepted are where we have the most trouble getting reports, because it's not generally reported that anybody got bit. And so this can be for a variety of reasons. They don't think it's important. They don't know. It's just, authority isn't worried about, treating or handling that type of thing. So the same places that aren't necessarily afraid of sharks, we have a large amount of missing data.
That's really interesting. Is there a way to mitigate that? Like, do you have people that go out and talk to locals and get their perspective on things, especially given that they aren't really afraid of them?
So we have collaborators all over the world, and various folks have different programs. And so some folks, really work in communities to make them value the animals more, especially in low income fishing communities. So rather than kill the sharks, be afraid of sharks, we want to save these sharks. They're better, teaching them that they're better for their actual overall fishing totals, as well as ecotourism in areas where we have more, quote unquote, Jaws inspired fear, like the US and Australia. We do a lot more campaigns on the ground with just everyday, folks, trying to educate them, because the more you know about something, the less scary it is. Sharks are easy to be kind of scared of. They've got really big teeth. They go large. They're in the ocean where we can't see them, can't get to them. That can be spooky. But when you learn about stuff, and I actually do this with bite victims who know nothing. They just went to the beach one day and maybe they lost a leg. Maybe it's very traumatic. And so part of that healing process is actually confronting that fear. And so learning really helps.
Thank you. And then one more question. So how do UF students get involved with the Shark Attack Files? And I know you also have a sawfish program as well.
Yep. So I can put my email in the chat. I'm program coordinator and manager. So all undergraduate volunteers go through me in my office, even if you're not working directly for me. So yeah, just reach out to me and we can talk about that more.
Thanks so much.
We have a few questions in the chat. that have been waiting, so I will get to you. But yeah, so someone asked, how can a shark clone itself? And then multiple people ask what your favorite shark species is. Are you seeing?
So I can start with the clone. So it's a process called parthenogenesis. Essentially, certain females of certain species, and the extent of this, we don't even know. The only reason we're aware of this in the first place is because essentially a Jurassic Park-like situation, we've got a bunch of females in an aquarium and suddenly one gets pregnant. So we don't even know how often this happens in the wild or the extent across species. We just know a handful that have been in aquariums of all females. And essentially an egg is not fertilized, but it starts to mature. It, binds to the uterine wall and starts to develop. And it is a carbon copy of that mother. And so actually our research group, one of the current projects is actually looking into at least guesstimating the rate of parthenogenesis in the wild and trying to think about factors that could induce that.
Very interesting.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say the next question
Sure.
that was asked. Multiple people asked what your favorite shark species is.
I don't have a favorite shark species. So there are more than 500 species of sharks, and we keep finding more, especially deep water species. And they're all very unique and crazy. They all have these special superpowers. Not even 2 years ago, we found the pocket shark under its pectoral fins and essentially its armpits. It has pockets and it can shoot bioluminescent glowing goo out of these pockets. That's amazing. And, we just keep finding more and more of these species that can do these incredible things. So I don't have a favorite shark. I love them as a group, and I'm always finding, an individual species or something about them to find interesting and appreciate.
That is so interesting. Oh my gosh. And then, yeah, we also have another question also related to parthenogenesis in the chat, just whether those shark species that do that have a more difficult time developing as compared to oviparity and viviparity.
So if you're referring, let me look at the question. Those embryos have more difficult time. There's no evidence to my knowledge that those embryos have any more trouble developing. Now, as far as the long term, over multiple generations, if you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, we all know that doesn't end well. But the idea is that in an environment lacking males, you want to pass on those genes. And so in the short term, you can make a copy of yourself and hopefully that copy can find a male, and we're going down a deep rabbit hole, and it's great that you're curious in this, and I encourage you to look more into it. But sex is a costly process. It doesn't honestly make a lot of sense. I mean, we have bacteria that can just, make a copy. We also have viruses that have 8 different sexes. So the whole concept, when you really think about it, is, well, why would I really want to go through the effort of finding someone of the opposite sex to reproduce? And the most logical answer is diversity in the genes, so that you're combining those genes so that you can create this more novel individual that wouldn't be as susceptible to whether any type of environmental or internal, negative, adverse things. A Additionally, we do know from like bacteria that if we do have a lot of inbreeding, like a really strong bottleneck effect. So think about if you put a bunch of things on an island, if they all just got inbred and they got all these mutations and then died off, then we wouldn't see life on islands. But what happens is eventually, after generations of generations, after all of these deleterious or bad mutations get worked out, we actually see these stronger individuals. So then comes the question is, can we have a whole population of just clones? And I really can't do this question justice in just a short time, because this could be a whole class. So I really encourage that person to look into this more, because it is a current subject matter that we know very little about. It's really cool.
Thank you. That was really interesting. We have one more question in the chat for now. Do you know how cage diving involving chumming affects future interactions with those sharks, whether it has a negative effect on shark behavior?
Yeah, so cage diving is a really kind of dubious double-edged sword. On one hand, you've got this thriving ecotourism. So we're bringing money into usually poorer communities. There's more protections for these animals in areas where, or for species that already have protection. We often don't see, small, poor communities respecting those laws until there's ecotourism. So the animals are safer. However, we're changing their behavior, and you should never, ever feed wildlife. And because they'll start to be drawn to boats. So there's been multiple studies across species that show even the sound of a motor in some areas is enough to attract sharks, because they know that means food. And that can be a problem, because what if they show up and that group of people weren't there to feed sharks? Well, they can get angry. And since they don't have voices of their own or hands of their own, the only way they know to really ask is to give a little nibble. And that can be a problem. I had a diver just the other week. They went diving in an area where they bait sharks. They didn't have any bait. I got a nip on the hand just because they were asking, which is the same kind of stuff. And it's not unique to sharks. If you did this kind of stuff to a dog or a cat, you could get similar reactions, and people don't really like to put that together. So it's a hard gray area, and I don't have a great fix. A lot of people have made this kind of question their life's work, and it's an ongoing process.
Nice. That's really interesting. Does anyone else have any questions?
I was wondering about the funding structure for the Dingell-Johnson Act. Does the money from the permits for those species go directly into the conservation of those species, or is it like a pool?
That's a great question. So Dingell-Johnson and Pittman-Robertson, which is the hunting equivalent, when you buy a fishing license, fishing equipment, or boat gas, all of that has the license, the whole sale goes in, but for the other things, there's an excise tax. And all of that goes into a pool, both at the state and national level. And so the nice thing about this, which we really couldn't get away with it today, is when this was originally set up, nobody can steal from that pot of money. So if the state is saying, oh, well, we got to fix those roads, and they can't go steal wildlife money. So that money's protected. So it goes to wildlife. And so it not just goes to programs for those game species, but it goes for everything. So some states, their entire conservation programs are entirely funded by hunting and fishing sales. And so they're just really important programs. And people often don't, even people who participate don't always know the significance of what they're contributing.
Thank you.
All right. If there are not any more questions. Let me check the chat. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. This is really interesting. You brought up a lot of really like just so many different elements of sharks that I hadn't even thought of before. And it looks like everyone also enjoyed this talk. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good night.